Welcome on back to the next episode of the Country and Cold Cans podcast. We are the Oak City Drifters. I'm Logan.
And I'm Andrew.
And today we actually have a very special guest on the show. We have singer-songwriter, in my opinion, one of the most prolific songwriters I've in music today. We have the frontman from the old 97s, Mr. Rhett Miller.
All right. Howdy, y'all.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. I definitely I got to say, I'm a huge fan. I've been a fan for a few years. My older brother kind of turned me on to you guys about 3-4 years ago. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. And thanks for tracking me down. We're backstage before my Durham show.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, North Carolina.
Over here at Motorco Music Hall. If anybody, when next time he's in town, y'all need to definitely come and see whether he's on a solo show or with the old 97s, because it's definitely a great time. But anyways, let's jump right on into this. So, basically, like I said, I'm a big fan of the old 97s. So, I kind of wanted to start there, how the band was founded, exactly. I know you and Murray go way back. So
boy, the old 97 started 25 years ago, and Murray and I started before that. God, 8 years before that. So I was 15 years old when I met Murray, and I opened for his band. Was my very first gig I ever did. And he recorded some demos for me, and I was just a little high school kid. And then he produced the first record I made in, still in high school. And then I went off to college, and Murray talked me into dropping out, which seemed like a good idea at the time. And
I'm sure that went over well with your folks.
Oh my God! And I had a full scholarship too, and I gave it up. Yeah, like a jerk. But then, but we started a band called Sleepy Heroes, and that band kind of floundered. Then we went through a bunch of bands. And none of them felt real natural. And we decided, because we were trying to do a rock thing that didn't really sound like us exactly. It just didn't feel natural. And then we kind of got sick of it, and we quit for about 6 months. And then we came back together and said, what if we do something that nobody will like? What if we just do something that we like, that's kind of country and folky, and we'll play in coffee shops? And so we started doing the old 97s, and at the beginning we didn't have a drummer, and then we wound up getting Philip not too far in, because we realized we wanted to rock a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then it's been 25 years. I can't even believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That actually kind of segues into the one thing that I've always been enamored about with the old 97s is it seems like all the mix of different genres and influences. And I hear the country, I hear the folk, I hear the rock and roll and everything. I kind of wanted to see exactly what were the big influences on y'all as a band, and also the influences on you as an artist individually.
Yeah, well, Murray is the musicologist. He's the one that gets obsessed with music and used to buy box sets when that was a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Buy all the CD box sets and just go down deep diving in all the crazy catalogs of people like the Carter family. When we started the band, the Carter family was number one.
Right.
Y'all can hear right now Joshua Ray Walker is sound checking. Maybe he's coming in the background of this interview. He's really great.
Oh yeah, check that guy out, because I found him through via BJ Barham on Twitter. And, he's definitely somebody you should definitely check out.
Big things about him.
Boy, Josh is great, and he's young, and he's just got his first record out, and he's got big things ahead. But so when I was his age and a little younger, it was, I liked. I kind of grew up liking I came from the Beatles into British stuff, and then I came back around later and fell in love with Hank Sr. and Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash.
Oh yeah.
And then so the songs that I started writing were some kind of weird hybrid of the kind of country and folk music I grew up hearing a lot, and then the stuff that I'd kind of gone out and rebelled against the country and folk by finding this British stuff. So yeah, it's I've never really fit in super well with the straight up country crowd, just because I've always come at it from a different spot.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like with that kind of alt country kind of sound as it was more so deemed at the time, with Uncle Tupelo, all that stuff, the No Depression era and all that. You guys were kind of at the very beginning of that, on the forefront of that as well, with the alt country kind of movement that was going on. Did you guys kind of see yourselves as a part of alt country, or what did you think about that term when it kind of stuck?
I remember when that term got invented. There was a lot of terms flying around. We just thought we were weird. We thought we were kind of folky, kind of a little bit. We were definitely throwing some Buck Owens in there. We were thinking a lot about that, and Hank Sr. and but yeah, we didn't really think about what we were too much. We just knew that we wanted to be this kind of thing that we liked. And then all of a sudden there were a few bands that kind of sounded like us. And Uncle Tupelo was around at the time, and they I remember were one band that I was like, oh my God, these guys are kind of like us. And then they broke up. In fact, they finished their very first album they ever did. They moved all their stuff out of the studio the morning that we, that afternoon, moved our stuff in and recorded our first demo in Cedar Creek in Austin. So it was like this weird kind of connection where their final recording ended the morning our recorded started in the same room. So.
Yeah.
And I've since become friends with Tweety, and I think he's done great stuff.
Phenomenal artist.
I mean, he's obviously made a big effort to be more than that. But I remember when that became the word alt country, and they, some people were calling it insurgent country, and some people were calling it, they were trying out is this outlaw country, and alt country felt right because at the time alt rock was such a thing that people were using to describe what was happening in the 90s with rock music.
Right.
So alt country was kind of just a response to that alt rock moniker. But even that felt immediately that felt restrictive and reductive, and I was like, well, that's okay. That's a little bit of what we are.
Right.
But people they need to be able to describe things, so they come up with words. And
it feels like, we kind of see this in music now today. It feels like anytime there's a country element, they want to automatically group it in as country. Even if you can't have something that's just like country influenced,
Like they want to put a label on it.
Exactly.
A specific label on everything.
And that's not always necessary. Good music is good music, so.
Yeah, definitely. I used to use the word, and now I kind of feel like it's not a fair word to use, but I used to feel like there was a country ghetto, and we would get stuck in it. Because when we were on Elektra Records, and they had like Third Eye Blind and all these kind of big pop bands, and then they would look at us and go like, what's wrong with y'all? Why do you got to do that? And I was like... I remember they wanted really badly when we signed to Elektra, they wanted us to take the word old off of our name because they felt like that really was like a country signifier.
Right.
Can't you just be the 97s or be the new 97s? I'm like, oh, look, I know it's bad marketing to be called old, but at this point it's too late.
How did that name come about, the old 97s?
Murray and I were going back and forth, and he really loved the Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash didn't write it, but Johnny had a hit with the song Wreck of the Old 97.
Okay, yeah.
So we became the old 97s. There was Joe Strummer, the lead singer of The Clash, had a band called the 101ers.
Right.
So when I was like, I don't know, Murray, that sounds weird. He goes, well, Joe Strummer had a band called the 101ers. And I was like, okay, fine. And I remember at the time we were like, well, wouldn't it be confusing when it's 1997? Because this was 93. And we had never had a band that lasted more than like 6 months. So we thought, oh, well, that'll never be an issue. And now it's like
25 years later.
Yeah, and now 1997 was 23 years ago almost. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, speaking of like country legends, like one thing I definitely wanted to ask you about was when you guys did that, cut those tracks with Waylon Jennings. Like, that's awesome. Like, how did that come about exactly? Because you guys were kind of a young band at that point, I think. Right?
Oh yeah, we totally were. Yeah. We had just put out our second record on Bloodshot, so it was 94, and Waylon saw us play at a radio thing that we did that was in a conference room at a hotel, and Waylon sat in the front row, and it was terrifying. He was like 5 feet in front of me, and there's like neon lights on in the room, and I'm like, oh Jesus. But I did my thing. When we did our thing, we were loud, and we were kind of like, the punk rock version of country music. And he was real nice afterwards. We got to meet him, but I didn't think anything was ever going to come of it. And then he talked about us in the paper in Austin a couple of weeks later, and somebody sent, this is like old days with mail. Somebody mailed me a copy of the Austin newspaper, and I read it, and I was like, oh, he's like, somebody said, what's the future of country music? And Waylon said, the old 97s are the future of country music.
Wow,
and I was like, oh my God.
High praise right there.
Yeah. And so I wrote him a letter in the mail and put it in an envelope and mailed it to him and said, man, if you ever want to do anything together. And then we heard back from his manager saying, Waylon wants to record with you guys as his band. And so he's picked out 2 of your songs. And so we went into the studio with him and recorded the 2 songs. And he got sick right after that and wound up in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And so they got shelved. They didn't want to release him with him being sick. And then he ended up getting better for a little while, but it wound up just kind of, he didn't do that much after that. I remember Shooter was there that day that we recorded. Shooter was hanging out, and he was just a little like high school kid wearing a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt. It was sweet. Waylon couldn't have been nicer or cooler or more generous, or because he didn't have to be nice to us, but he was, that he told us stories, he gave us advice. I still think a lot of times about just some of the stuff that he told me that day, just as kind of a mentor.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think about that now when I have younger people coming to me and asking about how would you do it, and which nowadays it's so hard. I'm not really sure what to tell them, but I always try and take time and just try and remember how nice he was and how much it meant to me.
Right. Try to return the favor to the new kids coming up today as he did for you back in the day.
I mean, as it's obvious that it made a big impact, so it's something definitely that I think is very respectable that you do for younger artists now. So,
thanks. Yeah, and it's worked out. I mean, you're wearing a Turnpike hat right now, and I just
big
remember
Turnpike fan.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when I very first met Evan, they were already doing great, and he'd already sort of found his voice and figured it out. But I've definitely, stayed friends with him, and we've written songs together. And there have been times when Evan's even come to me and asked me questions, and I've been like, well, let me tell you, you young whippersnapper.
That's awesome. Yeah, like I saw actually a few years ago. You did some dates with BJ Barham when he was going on a solo tour, right? Because I think I remember him posting on Instagram. He thought it was crazy that he was getting to ride around with Rhett Miller.
Yeah,
yeah, like that was pretty cool. Like because like American Aquarium is my favorite band, so it was kind of cool like to see the connections there.
Yeah, BJ's great.
Yeah. But so like when it comes to like your solo records, so full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of 2002's The Instigator. Like that's in my regular rotation of records all the time. Specifically, the song "Our Love," like that guitar solo on that is badass.
Dude, John Bryan, who produced that, I remember when I was interviewing musicians to be in the solo band to go out on tour to do that. Really, the whole audition was just play that solo. I mean, because there will never be anything harder for a guitar player to do than the guitar solo on the song "Our Love." It's crazy. At the time, John Bryan, who did that solo and produced the album, was studying Chet Atkins guitar, where Chet Atkins would do a thing where he'd bend a string up, and then with the finger that bent that string up, he'd pick up another string, and then and as he was bending the first string down, he would bend the string he'd picked up. So he'd be bending.
Wow.
You'd have strings going up and down simultaneously, and it's crazy, and it's just so hard to do it. But
and it sounded phenomenal on that track too.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy because like as somebody who like I'm reluctant to call myself a guitar player because I know they're just the regular G C D E minor kind of stuff.
Me too.
Just enough to facilitate being able to play open mic. but yeah, like that. I love that record, and like one thing that I kind of noticed, and I wanted to ask you about this, whether this was conscious or whether this was just how it kind of happened. Like, if you hear like early old 97 stuff, you definitely hear a very strong country influence, and like we talked about the old alt country kind of thing at the time. But as you went on, it kind of became a little bit more rock and roll.
Yeah.
Then it was kind of like the inverse with your solo stuff. Like you had a little bit more of a rock and roll record with The Instigator, but it kind of started to drift a little bit more like, rootsy with some fiddle and some pedal steel and everything as it went on.
Well, there's a thing that happened where when I first started doing solo records, I felt like I needed to make it super obvious to the fans why I was doing solo records. I had all these songs that my band didn't like, and they were piling up. And finally I went to the guys and said, would it be cool if I made solo records, because you keep turning down these songs that I think are good? And they were cool about it, but I felt like I needed a real clear delineation between what the 97s do and what I did. So I made a record that didn't sound like a 97s record at all. But then as the 97s have gone on, we've become more of like a garage band almost.
Right.
And so as the 97s have moved away from, and this is actually in the last record or two, we've kind of gone back a little, but as the 97s have moved away from like real rootsy sounding acoustic stuff, it's like made it possible. And now that people aren't freaking out about me making solo records, the fans getting afraid the band will break up.
Yeah.
I've been able to then go in and kind of fill in that gap by making solo records that use fiddles and pedal steel and do a lot of stuff that the 97s aren't even doing anymore.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's awesome because, like, I definitely noticed that, and I love your solo records, too. Like, one song in particular off your new record, I used to write notebooks.
Yeah.
It's awesome because, like, I hear so many artists, like, when they talk about songwriting, how they used to always, it was pen and paper.
Yeah.
Like, now everyone's writing on, iPhone notes, iPhone memos, everything. It's just kind of like the way the world has changed.
I still actually do. It's like that Mitch Hedberg joke where he says, I used to do drugs. I mean, I still do drugs, but I also used to do drugs. But it's I used to write in notebooks, and I still also do write in notebooks. But I do. It's everybody I know now has switched over to writing on their laptop, writing on their phone, and I'll do stuff on my phone too. But I just like the idea of paper, and if I drop it in the lake, it's not gonna. Stop, lose all my stuff.
It's not gone forever.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. And there's something to be said for kind of like sticking to. I'm a big guy that likes traditional kind of stuff, so it's something to be said for pen and paper when it comes to writing a song.
Yeah.
But do you have any questions? Like, because I've been kind of like dominating.
Oh yeah. I'm sitting here too, just listening over here, just listening too. Do you do question? Do you do any co-writing?
Yeah.
Or do you write strictly by yourself?
I love writing by myself, and I never felt the need to co-write, but then it became a thing that people would talk about, and I'd get asked to do it, and sometimes it's great. Like, I love writing with Evan, and he and I've written, a bunch of songs that I really love, and in fact, there's a couple of songs that I think are going to wind up on the new 97s record. There's a couple of songs that have wound up on Turnpike Records that he and I wrote together. I mean, Evan he's tough to write with because he's so good. I mean, there's not a lot of room left
I heard
there.
him in an interview. He said that when it's his idea about a song, he gets real hard-headed about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I heard, too, he said, too, when writing songs, he likes to take other people's ideas and then come back and just fill in the blanks. So he said it's a lot easier that way because there's not as much pressure having to come up with the original idea for it.
Well, that's true. And the songs of ours that have worked best together that I feel like are the most collaborative are the ones where I've kind of brought him something and then he's filled in all the holes. Because if it's his... Like, I'll listen to it at the end and I'll be like, I guess I did a couple of things in there.
Right.
but it's, it's like, that's kind of how I feel sometimes. It's like, I don't really need the help, but I do like, and every once in a while I have needed help. So it's good. Like, Ben Queller and I wrote a song together that I never would have finished without him. There's a song that I wrote with Evan I never would have finished unless it was for him. But there have been times where I've gotten put together with people that it didn't feel like. There's Jessica Simpson's little sister, Ashley Simpson.
Yeah, okay.
I got put together with her, and she never ended up even making a record, but I did all these sessions with her trying to teach her how to write songs. And
Right.
I mean, whatever. But then I've really loved writing with Nicole Atkins and Caitlin Rose, and we wrote a song with Brandi Carlile that turned out to be so great. And
she seems like she's on the cusp of breaking out right now. Like, after that Grammy performance, and then I saw her with performing at Loretta Lynn's party. Like, I think she's on the cusp of kind of hitting that next level, kind of like we've seen with Tyler Childers and Jason Isbell and folks like that.
I think it's happened for sure. She's a star.
Oh, that voice is just unique and phenomenal. Like, when she hits that, her Grammy performance, when she hit that note, like, I can't remember the line in the song off the top of my head right now, but just like when you hear it, what I'm talking about. Like, that was an awesome performance.
Yeah.
But,
so great.
Is there anybody that you haven't got to write with that you'd like to write with?
Oh man. For a while I really wanted to write with Jenny Lewis, who is just on tour now with a new record that's out. And we actually had a session lined up years ago, and then her management called it off for whatever reason. I think they were like, well, she doesn't need any songs. And I'm like, well, but I do.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've really loved a lot of songs she's written. I don't know, man. It's funny. I don't think too much about that. I enjoy writing sometimes with writers. Like, I've written songs with this novelist, Michael Chabon, who I really like, and Ben Acker's another writer that I've written songs with and really like, Ben Greenman. That's a cool thing, too, because as much as I love writing words, novelists, like proper writers, prose writers, they come at it from such a different place that it shakes it up and it pushes me in a good way. It's funny, tomorrow I think I'm supposed to talk to John Darnielle from Mountain Goats.
Oh, yeah.
Who lives here in town. He's a hell of a writer.
Right.
Oh, my God. I mean, his lyrics are insane. I just can't even figure out how he gets to where he's going. I mean, and I don't know that I would want to write with him necessarily. Not that he wouldn't need any help. But I love the way his mind works. I'd love to watch him write a song and be able to ask him.
Pick his brain.
Yeah, like, why'd you do that? Why'd you go there?
I know recently you just kind of read an article on No Depression about songwriting.
Yeah.
And I've read that, and we were talking about that on the way here to Durham, actually from Raleigh. And is there a particular, I guess format that you always follow, or is it just kind of come differently each time you write a song?
Man, every time is different, and you have to know that a lot of times it won't work. Like I
Right.
sat down this afternoon, I was able to check into my hotel, and I was going to write a song, and I had a little chord progression that I thought was cool, and I ran it into a wall, and then I went and did some other stuff, and I came back to it, and I had some cool ideas, but it's, again, I kind of ran into a wall. I just think that when people get frustrated, probably with any kind of art, but I know for sure with songs, that it's just, you got to know that that's part of it. Like, you know, if you give up and say, well, I'll just come back to it. When you come back to it, you're going to run into a wall too sometimes, and you just got to push through and push through. So I don't know, man. I feel like you have to do it even when it doesn't feel great, because every once in a while you'll sit down and you won't expect it to feel great, and you'll get a song 30 minutes later and it'll be the best song you've ever written.
Oh yeah.
And you'll have no idea how that happened.
Yeah.
And so you just gotta put up with the hard times, because every once in a while you'll get rewarded by one of those great
just
times.
trying to push it throughout. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was Jason Isbell that was saying that he doesn't think that writer's block is a real thing. He said he thinks that you just need to get out the bad, and then follow it normally is something that's really good that follows the bad.
Man, yeah, I agree, and I don't want to shame any of my co-workers that do talk about writer's block, because we all talk about things and think about things in different ways, and that's fine for them. But I know for me, I don't believe in writer's block. You do what you do, and sometimes you run into a wall, and sometimes you write something that sucks. You just got to keep going, because the next thing won't.
Oh yeah, and while we're talking on the topic of writing, like I know that you recently have actually been doing like poetry, like just kind of like tell us about that. How that came about.
I got these kids that are now they're teenagers, but when they were in their a little younger, we were reading a lot of Shel Silverstein, and so I thought, man, I could do something like that. So I started writing them, and the next thing you know, I had this big batch of these kind of subversive kids poems, and they're stupid and silly, and some people have gotten upset about it. There's one where the dad's begging the older sister not to murder her younger brother, and he's listing off all the ways she could murder. And yeah, it's like, dude, it's a joke. People have hit me up on Instagram like, this is so horrible. And I'm like, yeah, it would be horrible if people really were murdering people.
Right.
But that's why it's a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes people just need to kind of like take it easy a little bit. But,
totally.
But I guess like another thing I did want to ask you about, because we're kind of about to hit our time limit here, but I'm like, so you guys, like we had talked about earlier how you guys were kind of part of the all country scene, and then like that kind of fell out of favor a little bit, and then like now I know there's this like Texas Red Dirt kind of like scene out in that region, and while I wouldn't say you guys are a Texas Red Dirt artist, you've kind of been embraced by that community, so to speak. Because I mean I've seen you do videos for like Texas music scene, like when Ray Benson was hosting that and everything. Like how did that really kind of come about? Was it like how you guys kind of like started to kind of become associated with that a little bit?
It's funny because I'd kind of heard about it a little bit, but I didn't know what it was or understand it. Because I mean, I live in the country in New York now,
right?
So so there's stuff that happens that I'm that just checked out on off being a dad. But so when I got to be friends with Evan from Turnpike, it kind of opened up this whole world of me. I'm like, oh my God, you guys, there's like a whole scene here and everybody's doing it. And there's actually good music, because I just figured, I don't know, like it was just something that I wasn't going to get. I was like, okay, yeah, I actually like a lot of this. And a lot of these people are, people that I knew about already. And I didn't realize that they kind of got lumped into this genre. And then the next thing you knew, I started doing stuff like the Mile Zero Festival and doing tours with American Aquarium. And I realized like, oh yeah, actually there's artists in this genre that like the old 97s and call us an influence from when they were starting. And that was the funniest thing to me, was seeing how great Evan was. I remember hearing 7 and 7 and going like, oh my God, I wish I'd written that song.
Yes,
and then
that's an awesome song.
And then he told me, he's like, when we started the band, the whole idea was old 97s with a fiddle. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so great. I've wondered when it would finally happen that somebody would come and point to us. So.
And like honestly, I can kind of hear the influence you guys have had, like with their guitar tones and everything, like and like the speed in which their tempo of their songs, like because that's one thing that you guys y'all have a lot of tempo and a lot of your music, and I dig that. Yeah. So
I think one thing that they're really good at is giving the audience a good time.
Right.
I think that one thing that some bands fall into, a trap that some bands fall into, is you get too much into like, oh, I gotta be serious, and I gotta, and this is a heartfelt or whatever. You're like, oh Jesus. Well, still, you know what? Still, everybody made an effort to be here tonight. And they paid good money, and they want to have fun. So don't forget about that.
You can still do sad lyrics set to a fast tempo.
Fast tempo post song
Yeah.
with the loud fiddle.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's been my trick forever.
the-
Oh yeah,
electric
it's awesome.
guitars
Yeah.
leading, yeah,
Sad
exactly.
songs played loud. I really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I guess
love it.
one last question I have for you before we kind of like wrap things up. I've always heard, and I always wanted to ask you in person, was do the old 97s really not ever rehearse?
Ha! You know, we just put out a Christmas record last year.
Right.
And we started a tour in Seattle. And we all flew in one day early and did one rehearsal for that tour because we had to learn all these Christmas songs that we'd
Right.
recorded but only played like one time. So that was, we were all looking at each other going, this is so weird. That was probably the only rehearsal we've done in, I don't know, 15 years. But, you know,
That's
we just...
crazy.
We
You guys are so good. Like,
Thanks, man. We just played so much. We'll play a song and sound check and kind of learn it, and then we'll probably screw it up a couple of times, and then eventually we'll get good at it. But
Right.
yeah, I think there's a level of laziness with some of my bandmates, and I do solo gigs between tours all the time, so I'm always kind of off book on stuff. But you know, it's not rocket science.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, is there any new music on the horizon from the 97s?
Yeah, man, we're writing right now. It looks like we're going to go back in for pre-production in September. We will do that still. We'll go and get together and work up songs. And then probably studio in October, probably new record in the beginning of 2020.
Okay, awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess since we're running a little close on time here,
Yeah.
since we're on a podcast here
Yeah.
before the end, I heard you started a podcast.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that.
I got a show called Wheels Off that comes out every 2 weeks where I just interview artistic type, creative type people about, you know, their process and their life and
Right.
their journey. And I'm trying to be useful. I'm trying to get people to think about stuff that'll help other people who are struggling or, you know, like we
Right.
talk about running into walls.
Yep.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. That's awesome. Like, I've been listening to it. It's good stuff. But we do want to thank you again. We can't thank you enough for taking the
Yeah.
time to do this, man.
Yeah,
Like, we really do
absolutely.
appreciate it. So.
Well, it's super cool. I'm glad y'all are doing it.
Thanks.
you.
And
Thank
I guess this wraps up another episode of the Country and Cold Cans podcast. We are the Oak City Drifters. I'm Logan,
And I'm Andrew.
and we will see you next time.